In this video, we will create a sample dashboard. First, create a new solution. Choose your desired folder location. Let's name this project Hello Dashboard. The dashboard needs a very wide screen. So first, we need to adjust the display size. Go to the Render Targets tab, then select the display. The resources for this sample have been designed for 1500 by 600. You can enter your desired resolution in the display properties. We can see the new aspect ratio of the camera viewport. Next, let's bring in our images. We can add them in the existing folder bitmaps under Solution, Resources. Right-click and select Import Resources. Let's save the current solution. Browse to the images and select them for import. For now, we don't want an extra folder created. For this sample, we will use a design master. It is like a stencil or image guide. It will help us position elements as intended in the design. To enable it, we can go to File, Solution Options. From the list on the left, select Design Master. Check the box to enable it. Now select a background image to use as a guide. And adjust transparency using the slider. Now let's add some gauge controls. We can see the Design Master in the viewport. Go to the Toolbox tab and expand the Common Construction Kit. Drag a gauge from here to the Controls folder of the solution. Now we can customize it. Let's replace the default images with the ones we imported. Select the background image, then its image property provider. We can edit its image property from the Properties panel. Browse to our imported images and select one for the new background. We can select a new needle image the same way. Select the Provide Image Property behavior. Then set its image property to the imported needle image. You may notice that the images don't look properly centered. This is because we need to set their pivot points. To do this, first select the needle image. Then go to the Properties panel to enable Pivot Hint. Coordinates depend on the image. For this one, 190 and 22 are appropriate. Right-click and refresh scene to see the latest changes. Now for the gauge image. Select it and enable Pivot Hint. For this image, 280 for both X and Y. Refresh again. Customized gauge is now ready. We can now place it in our scene. First, double-click Scene 2D. Then drag and drop the customized gauge into the scene tree. This is the RPM gauge, so the one on the right. You can enable the translation gizmo to move it. Then use the Design Master to place it precisely. You can quickly zoom in or out using the mouse wheel. Let's say this is fine. Now let's set up the values for the gauge. Double-click the control to enter it. We can go to the Control Value Provider behavior. and set value to 0. As you can see, the maximum value is configurable. Let's set it to 700 for this sample. We can now return to our scene and rename this as RPM gauge. Now to add a speed gauge also. We can use the default gauge from Toolbox Controls Common. Just drag and drop it into the scene tree and use the Design Master to place it. This design mockup was created using a different gauge, so it's not a pixel-perfect match, but it can still help us position elements. Let's say this is fine. We can also enter this control by double-clicking it, but this one is an instance of the gauge from the toolbox, so we are not allowed to directly configure it. Let's go back to our scene. We can rename this to speed gauge. And we can edit the public properties of the control. We can set the needle to 0. Let's also add a telltale. We can find this control under Common, and we can click and drag it to our scene tree. Now we can move it around to position it according to the design. Let's say this is fine. Now let's add a gas indicator. We will use the slider control from the touchable set. Again, we just drag it to our scene tree. Then we position it. You can freely drag it, or use the gizmo for axis-constrained movement. Here seems fine. We can simply do a copy to reuse this for temperature. Right-click and select Clone. Copy will have the same position, so it's on top of the original slider. If we want the same vertical position, we can drag it just on the horizontal axis. Before we set up the logic, let's add the static images. We can go to our Imported Images folder in Resources. And if we click and drag an image to the scene tree, a render node will be created. We will position it according to the Design Master. But first, let's also add the temperature icon and the photo image. These fit the design, so we can position them precisely. We can zoom in to make it pixel perfect. And now the gas icon. Seems okay. And finally, the temperature icon. Let's say it's fine. We can rename the sliders to reflect their function. This one is the petrol bar. And this is the temperature bar. To visualize the speed better, we can also display it as a text. In the common category, we have a text control which can be bound to data from the application. But to display numbers, a text value control is more appropriate. So we can drag it into the scene tree and rename it to speed text. As format text, we can use a C++ style format string. For now, let's type 00 and place it in the design. We can set the format to something like 2-digit decimal with leading 0. And to display RPM, we can clone and modify this. This time, let's use the clone dialog to rename it. Then move it horizontally to the RPM gauge. The behavior and aspect of most controls depends on a value property. We can use a forward value behavior to synchronize the values of two controls. This behavior is found under Behaviors, Value Processing. Let's drag one and drop it over the RPM gauge node, and one over the speed gauge node. You will notice the colored square in the scene tree marking nodes with attached behaviors. In the properties of this behavior, we can select a target node. Then the value of this behavior will be sent to the target. We can browse through the solution to find the intended node. An appropriate name is helpful. And now to set up the speed gauge in a similar way. We edit the target node and look for the speed text. Now the gauge values should get sent to the text values. Before finishing up, we can add a small fix to the RPM gauge. You may notice the needle is pointing slightly below 0. We modified the background but still have the minimum and maximum angles from the default one. This can be measured precisely, but for now, -32 to 210 look close enough. Now both needles are pointing at 0 but at different angles. Let's check it out in the player. Click OK to save the current state. In the panel window, we can go to the Controls tab. Our scene can be selected from the list on the left. And now we can select individual controls and set values. We can set 100 to the RPM gauge. And notice the needle moved, and the text also received the value. We can try different values. The speed gauge should work the same way. And the telltale can be set to a blinking state. Let's also check the petrol slider. And finally, the temperature bar. so everything seems to be in order. Thank you so much for watching this CGI Studio tutorial.